One man made one decision and ruined millions of lives. In 1929 America, the stock market promised riches for anyone daring enough to invest. Charles "Sunshine Charlie" Mitchell, a celebrated banker, turned that dream into a gamble, pushing ordinary Americans into a speculative frenzy that would ignite the Great Depression and leave lasting devastation. The 1920s in America, known as the Roaring Twenties, were a time of booming business and endless optimism. Factories were producing cars, radios, and household goods faster than people could buy them. Life seemed full of opportunity, and many thought the good times would never end. But the stock market was still mostly a playground for the rich. Ordinary Americans had little access, and investing was seen as risky and complicated. Only a small percentage of the population owned stocks, and most banks focused on serving established wealthy clients rather than everyday people. Into this world stepped Charles E. Mitchell. Born in 1877 to a farming family in Massachusetts, he rose through the ranks of banking with remarkable speed. By 1919, he became the head of National City Bank, the largest bank in the country. Ambitious and charismatic, Mitchell had a revolutionary idea: make stock ownership possible for regular Americans, not just for the elite. He promised that anyone could get rich through the market, setting the stage for a financial experiment that would soon spin out of control. To make shares available to ordinary Americans, Charles created the National City Company, a branch of his bank that sold stocks directly to the public. He used advertising, persuasive speeches, and psychological sales techniques to paint investing as a way to achieve the American dream. One of Mitchell's most famous innovations was buying on margin. People could invest with only 10% of their own money while borrowing the rest from the bank, promising massive returns. This system made it seem like anyone could become wealthy almost overnight. Ordinary Americans, many with little understanding of finance, eagerly bought into the dream, mortgaging homes and selling possessions to invest. Under Mitchell, the stock market turned into a machine selling hope, ambition, and promise of easy riches, setting the stage for both extraordinary growth and catastrophic collapse. By the mid-1920s, Charles Mitchell's vision had transformed the stock market. Ordinary Americans were rushing in, eager to get rich. Stock ownership skyrocketed from around 500,000 people to over 10 million by 1929. Banks were lending massive amounts of money for stock purchases and margin loans, where investors only needed 10% of their own money. People went to extreme lengths to invest. Some mortgaged their homes, others sold personal belongings, all chasing the promise of quick wealth. Investment trusts emerged, pooling borrowed money to buy more stocks, creating a pyramid of debt that grew higher and more unstable each day. Stock prices were climbing far faster than the actual profits of companies, an unsustainable gap that worried only a few experts. Even the Federal Reserve warned banks about the dangers of excessive margin lending, but speculation continued unchecked. Greed and optimism blinded many to the risks. Everyone believed the market would keep rising, and Mitchell's bank encouraged this belief, offering both hope and easy access to borrowed money. By 1929, the financial system had become a fragile tower built on borrowed money and unrealistic expectations. Any small disruptions could trigger a collapse. Ordinary Americans who had been sold the dream of wealth were unknowingly at the top of a debt pyramid, about to face consequences far beyond their control. The turning point came on March 12, 1929. Charles Mitchell held a press conference that would change everything. He promised that National City Bank could provide unlimited liquidity to keep the market from falling. For a moment, it worked. Investors breathed easy, stocks rebounded, and the speculation frenzy resumed with renewed vigor. Ordinary Americans, inspired by Mitchell's confidence, poured into the market, borrowing heavily on margin, convinced that prices would only go up. By the mid-1929s, stock prices were hitting record highs. But beneath the surface, danger was mounting. Most investments were backed by only a fraction of real money. With so many relying on borrowed funds, even a small drop in prices could wipe out investors and their collateral, sending shockwaves through banks and the market. Autumn arrived, and the first cracks began to show. Some large investors quietly sold stocks, sensing trouble ahead. Their actions triggered panic among others, but it wasn't until October 24, Black Thursday, that the market truly collapsed. A flood of selling overwhelmed brokers and jammed telephone lines. By the end of the day, 13 million shares had changed hands, an unprecedented volume. The domino effect was swift and brutal. Falling stock prices faced margin calls, demanding that investors repay loans. Those unable to do so were forced to sell their shares, driving prices even lower. Stocks lost their value as collateral, banks stopped lending, and institutions that had issued margin loans began to fail. Ordinary Americans watched their life savings vanish almost overnight. The system Mitchell had built to democratize wealth had turned into a financial trap, leaving devastation in its wake. The stock market crash shattered lives across America. By 1933, roughly 1 in 4 Americans were unemployed, with 25 million people out of work. Factories closed, businesses went bankrupt, and families suddenly found themselves without any source of income. The streets of cities and towns were filled with the desperate and the hungry. Banks, unable to recover the massive margin loans they had issued, collapsed. Over 5,000 banks closed during the early years of the Depression, wiping out the life savings of millions who had trusted the system. Ordinary people who had borrowed or invested on margin were left with crushing debts and nothing to show for it. Homes were lost, farms were foreclosed, and entire communities struggled to survive. The human toll went beyond financial loss. Suicide rates rose by about 30%. Families were torn apart by hunger and poverty. Children were among the most vulnerable. Many dropped out of school to work and support their families, while others grew up in fear and uncertainty. The psychological impact of the Depression lingered for decades, leaving scars on an entire generation. While the crash started on Wall Street, its consequences rippled through every corner of American life. Ordinary people who had been lured into the market by promises of easy wealth were now paying the highest price. The dreams Mitchell had sold had turned into a nightmare, showing the dangers of unchecked greed, overconfidence, and a financial system built on borrowed money and speculation. The Great Depression was not just an economic disaster, it was a human catastrophe. Millions faced hunger, homelessness, and despair, and the nation would take years to recover, forever changing the way Americans viewed banks, investments, and the promises of quick fortune. After the crash, Charles Mitchell faced scrutiny, but little real punishment. In 1933, congressional hearings grilled him about his role in the collapse. Mitchell claimed he only wanted to give ordinary Americans a chance to get rich, avoiding full responsibility. He eventually resigned from National City Bank in disgrace after being found guilty of tax evasion. But public opinion remained divided. While he faded into obscurity, the bank survived, adopting more conservative policies. The crash led to major reforms in the American financial system. The Glass-Steagall Act separated commercial and investment banking, and the Securities and Exchange Commission was created to regulate the stock market. Deposit insurance was introduced, and strict rules for margin trading were enforced. Roosevelt even issued an executive order confiscating gold to regain control over the economy. These measures aimed to prevent another disaster and restore faith in finance. The story of Mitchell also serves as a warning for today. Modern investors using apps and margin loans echo the same risky behaviors that filled the 1920s bubble. Higher margin debt and speculative trading remain potential dangers, reminding us that promises of easy money can have catastrophic consequences if left unchecked. Ultimately, Charles Mitchell's vision to democratize wealth turned into a chain reaction of greed, optimism, and risky financial structures that triggered the Great Depression. His story is a reminder of how powerful decisions in finance can affect millions of lives, and why history must be remembered to avoid repeating the same mistakes.